Guess what today is? Today's my birthday! So let's read some more George Washington. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Practical Patriot. Today is my birthday. I share a month of birthday here in February with a few presidents, which is kind of fun. I never realized that my birthday was so close to Ronald Reagan's. That was just the other day. That's kind of exciting. I love Ronald Reagan. He's one of my favorite presidents. Other than George Washington, of course. So we are going to keep reading out of his farewell address, which was given, as I said last time, on September 19th, 1796. In the last episode, we finished off and he was talking about liberty. Oh, that's what he's always talking about. Liberty in government, parties causing faction, and how that can become divisive and people can start relying on someone to be an authoritarian. Remember that? The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline in the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Remember that part? So then he talked about public administration and foreign influence and corruption. And so we are going to start right at the end of where we left off. I'm just going to back up and read a sentence that we read last week and then keep going, because he talks about foreign policy in this next part, and he talks about religion and virtue, which you know is a big deal to me. I think that virtue is what we're missing in this country. Virtue and religion is what's going to help us turn the tide in our country to get it back to what it needs to be. And you don't have to be religious, but having virtue is still important, whether you're religious or not. So we're going to start here. But in those of the popular character in governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendency, it is certain that there will always be enough of that spirit for every salutary purpose, and there being constant danger of excess, the effort ought to be, by force of public opinion, to mitigate it. A fire not to be quenched. It demands a uniform vigilance to prevent it bursting into a flame, lest instead of warming, it should consume. I'm talking about opinion of parties in that paragraph. It is important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution to those entrusted with its administration, to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding in the exercise of the powers of one department to encroach upon another. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all departments into one, and thus to create whatever the form of government, a real despotism. A just estimate of that love of power and proneness to abuse it, which predominates in the human heart, is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power by dividing and distributing it into different depositories and constituting each the guardian of the public weal against invasions by the others has been evinced by experiments ancient and modern, some of them in our country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be an instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. So important. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all of their connections with private and public felicity. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths, which are the instruments of investigation in the courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. 'Tis substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. The rule indeed extends with more or less force to every species of free government. Who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric? Promote, then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. In proportion as the structure of a government gives force to public opinion, it is essential that that public opinion should be enlightened. As a very important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible, avoiding occasions of expense by cultivating peace, but remembering also that timely disbursements to prepare for danger frequently prevent much greater disbursements to repel it. Avoiding likewise the accumulation of debt, not only by shunning occasions of expense, but by vigorous exertions in times of peace to discharge the debts which unavoidable wars may have occasioned, but not ungenerously throwing upon posterity the burden which we ourselves ought to bear. The execution of these maxims belongs to your representatives, but it is necessary that public opinion should cooperate. Isn't that great? Talking about how it is better to prepare for danger than how much it would cost to pay for war. And to not have debt and to work on paying it off when you're in peace. And I would say, how do we pay off the debt if we're constantly in wars that don't really concern us? We're always meddling in other people's business. He talks about that in here too. To facilitate them the performance of their duty, it is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the repayment of debts there must be revenue, and to that revenue there must be taxes, and that no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient and unpleasant, that the intrinsic embarrassment inseparable from the selection of the proper objects, which is always a choice of difficulties, ought to be a decisive motive for candid construction of the conduct of government making it, and for a spirit of acquiescence in the measures for obtaining revenue which the public may at any time dictate. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be good policy that does not equally enjoin it? It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period a great nation to give mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruits of such a plan would richly repay the temporary advantages which might be lost by a steady adherence to it? Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent facility of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, is it rendered impossible by its vices? I love that about the Founding Fathers and George Washington. They just knew, and I've said this before, the nature of man never changes. The Founding Fathers knew that the nature of man is not good. We can try and be good, but deep down, what are we? We want what's best for ourselves, and we've talked about that before. Is it rendered impossible by its vices? We'll see. We're still growing as a country. In the grand scheme of things, we're still a relatively young country, and we need to save it. We have more time to be a country, America as we know it. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. And in that place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another in habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject, and at other times makes the animosity of nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The nature of man. Pride, ambition, sinister motives. The peace, often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations, has been the victim. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of another, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter, without adequate inducement or justification. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubtly to injure the nation, making the concessions by unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties of whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding with the appearances of a virtuous sense of obligation and a commendable difference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for public good, or the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation. This is so good. I just love this speech. As avenues to foreign influence and innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions or practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to satellite the latter. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful woes of Republican government. Isn't that true? Still today. But that jealousy, to be useful, must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side and to serve veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots, who may resist the intrigues of the favorite, are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. The great rule of conduct for us in regards to foreign nations is extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith, and here let us stop. Europe has a set of primary interests, which to us have none, or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties to the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we might have at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected, when belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us provocation, when we may choose peace or war as our interest, guided by our justice, shall counsel. Why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand on foreign ground? Preach! Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, or other part of the world I would add, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? Think about all the different parts of the world that we're involved in right now. The same applies, in my opinion. Back to the letter. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. So far, I mean, we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be understood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. I hold the maxim no less applicable to public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. I repeat it, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense, but in my opinion it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishments on respectably defensive posture, we may safely trust our temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest. But even our commercial policy should hold an equal and impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means the streams of commerce, but forcing nothing, establishing with powers so disposed in order to give to trade a stable course, to define the rights of our merchants and to enable the government to support them. Conventional rules of intercourse, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary and liable to be from time to time abandoned or varied, as experience and circumstances shall dictate. This is interesting. Constantly keeping in view that 'tis folly in one nation to look for disinterested favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence for whatever it may accept under that character, that by such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having given equivalence for nominal favors, and yet being reproached with ingratitude for not giving more. Isn't that what's happening all the time with America? We are always trying to get favors. We are always giving money, 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 more money to other nations. And then we are the ones who are looked down upon for not giving enough. Isn't that true? That drives me crazy. It reminds me of the UN and how many bajillions of dollars we put into the UN. And they still say, oh, America, you just don't give us enough. Really? Try again. 'Tis folly in one nation to look, 'tis folly in one nation to look for disinterested favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence for whatever it may accept under that character, that by such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having given equivalents for nominal favors, and yet of being reproached with ingratitude for not giving more. There can be no greater error than to expect or calculate upon real favors from nation to nation. 'Tis an illusion which experience must cure, which a just pride ought to discard. I am offering to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend. I dare not hope they will make the strong and lasting impression. I could wish that they will control the usual current of the passions, or prevent our nation from running the course which has hitherto marked the destiny of nations. But if I may even flatter myself that they may be productive of some partial benefit or some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. This hope will be a full recompense for the solicitude for your welfare by which they have been dictated. That's paragraph right there. Why we need to remind ourselves of real history, and why we need to stop changing history that we are teaching children in school. We need to stop that. History is history. We don't change it because we don't like what happened. History is history. And this is a perfect example of that. George Washington. He wanted this speech, his letters, to help us, that they may be productive of some partial benefit or some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. This hope will be a full recompense for the solicitude of your welfare by which they have been dictated. How far in the discharge of my official duties I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated, the public records and other evidences of my conduct must witness to you and to the world. To myself, the assurance of my own conscience is I have at least believed myself to be guided by them. In relation to the still subsisting war in Europe, my proclamation on the 22nd of April, 1793, is the index to my plan, sanctioned by your approving voice and by that of your representatives in both the House of Congress, in both houses of Congress. The spirit of that measure has continually governed me, uninfluenced by any attempts to deter or divert me from it. After deliberate examination with the aid of the best lights I could obtain, as well as satisfied that our country, under all the circumstances of the case, had a right to take, and was bound in duty and interest to take a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined, as far as should depend on me, to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. I see myself in George Washington there. I hope to do that, should I be elected. Be determined, as far as can depend on me, to maintain it, the Constitution, in my case, with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. The considerations which respect the right to hold this conduct, it is not necessary on this occasion to detail. I will only observe that according to my understanding of the matter, that right, so far from being denied from any of the belligerent powers, has been virtually admitted by all. The duty of holding a neutral conduct may be inferred without anything more from the obligation which justice and humanity impose on every nation. In cases which it is free to act and to maintain in the relations of peace and amity towards other nations. The inducements of interest for observing that conduct will be best referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time to our country to settle and mature its yet recent institutions, and to progress without interruption to that degree of strength and consistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects to not think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. Don't you wish all politicians would fervently beseech the Almighty before they make decisions in government? I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. Relying on its kindness in this as other things, and actuated by that fervent love towards it, which is so natural to a man who views it in the native soil of himself and his progenitors for several generations, I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promise myself to realize, without alloy, the sweet enjoyment of partaking in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, I trust, our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. Jeez, I'm getting emotional reading that last part. He loved this country so much. I'm emotional on my birthday. Can we get back to that, people? Can we get back to loving our country so much and the way it was founded that we don't think we have to change it every 5 minutes on the whim of whatever is going on? Let us be sound. Let us stand with virtue and righteousness towards the benefit of the people of our country, who are many and varied and come from so many different places. We are to be Americans, founded on liberty and freedom. Freedom to speak what we like. Freedom to petition our government. Freedom to peaceably assemble. Freedom to practice our religion as we please, or to not practice one. But that we don't force our religion on others, or our lack of religion, saying that we shouldn't be able to say things, that you're a Christian, you can't say this, or you're an atheist, be quiet. No, this is America. We need to be one, even though we are many. E pluribus unum, of the many, one. Let's do it. Let's be America. Read the Constitution. Read George Washington. Educate yourself on real history, not the history that's given to you by CNN and somewhat liberal institutions of higher education in this country. Do some digging on your own. Read what the real history is. So I probably won't be reading any more George Washington, but I got lots of other presidents that I like. So we'll go there next. Be blessed and stay free. See you next time.
Thanks for watching The Practical Patriot. Like and subscribe below.
That's right.